Hey, I'm Emily Carter. If you've ever watched someone you love be taken advantage of, if you've ever craved justice more than forgiveness, you're in the right place. Hit like if you believe heroes come in everyday clothes, subscribe for the full story of how silence became my sharpest weapon, and drop a comment, because this journey from betrayal to boundary setting starts now. I grew up believing in the simple sanctity of family first. Our home sat on a quiet cul-de-sac in a blue-collar town where your neighbors knew your name and loyalty was everything. My dad, John Carter, was the kind of man who greeted every hardship, be it a broken furnace or a broken heart, with a wry grin and a toolbox full of solutions. He had broad shoulders that could carry a plywood sheet or someone's darkest secret, and a laugh so warm it felt like summer sunshine even on the coldest winter morning. My earliest memories are of Christmas mornings scattered in colored paper and pine needles. I'd tumble downstairs in my pajamas to find Dad in his bathrobe, coffee in hand, brushing snow off the front step while humming carols. Mom would stroll in later, flawless hair and perfect posture, offering a tight smile that never reached her eyes. She'd ask how Dad was feeling as though she cared, then duck back into the kitchen to text some stranger, "Of course I'll be there. Just need to wrap this up." I'm not sure when I started noticing the cracks. Maybe it was the way she flinched if Dad's hand brushed her arm, or how her phone stayed glued to her ear during dinner, her laugh too rehearsed to be real. She would tell me, "Your father and I are, separated," but her lies floated around our house like dust motes, visible, unavoidable. When I pressed her about it, she'd reply, "It's complicated," then flash a warning look that made my stomach twist like a storm-tossed ship. When Dad was diagnosed 15 years ago with a degenerative nerve disease, his world shrank around those crumbling walls. He went from wiring houses for a living to wiring an electric blanket for warmth. His hands, once calloused from coaxing electricity through copper, shook so badly he could barely lift a coffee mug. I watched him fight for every ounce of dignity as Mom stopped showing up for his physical therapy appointments and took to telling her internet suitors that Dad was practically a corpse. She had mastered the performance of a devoted spouse on social media, heart emojis, cryptic posts about sticking by my man. But in private, she treated him like a walking ATM. I found forged checks made out to her name. I discovered hidden credit card statements with charges for weekend getaways she never took him on. And when I pleaded with her to let Dad move in with me, my little house 2 blocks away, wheelchair accessible, open arms, she'd intercept his calls. He'd look at me with those tired eyes and whisper, "This is my home. She belongs here." It felt like watching a slow-motion train wreck. I exhausted every legal channel I could find, adult protective services, elder neglect hotlines, even a pamphlet promising swift removal of abusive caretakers. Each time I filed a complaint, I got the same response. It's a civil matter. No criminal charges, no emergency intervention, just form letters and referrals back to her. Meanwhile, my father's body kept failing him, and my mother kept reinventing herself as the injured spouse. I remember one winter evening 5 years ago, Dad's blanket tangled around his legs, the fire sputtering low, when Mom snapped at me for making the living room a mess as I straightened pillows around his back. Her voice was sugar-coated poison. "Can't you see he's fine?" she said before slipping out the back door into the dark. I stood there, heart pounding, frozen by the injustice. How could she be so careless, so dismissive of the man who had built that room with his own 2 hands? Those years added up like interest on an unpaid debt, a relentless accrual of small cruelties. I cataloged them in my journal. Each missed doctor's appointment, every bailout of unpaid bills, every moment of my dad's quiet humiliation. In therapy, I learned the term maternal narcissistic abuse, but knowing the label didn't ease the ache. It only sharpened my awareness that I was living inside a horror story masquerading as a family sitcom. Then came November 2022. My dad's health tipped into a rapid decline. He could no longer swallow pills, could no longer stand without help. When I arrived that Thanksgiving week to bring him home on hospice, I hardly recognized the man who once hoisted me onto his shoulders. His skin was paper thin, his breath a shallow rumble. I wrapped him in a quilt I'd spent months hand-stitching, saturated with all the memories he'd given me. Summer fishing trips, late-night talks about first loves, the time he taught me to ride a bike. For the first time in 15 years, he didn't have to fight alone. And yet, even as I watched him settle into my living room, his favorite jazz record playing softly, hot tea steaming on the coffee table, I felt a knot tighten in my gut. Because Mom still had a say in everything that mattered. Her name was on his deeds, on his benefits, and now, on his funeral paperwork. I made his final days as bright as I could. Morning sunlight on the porch swing, fresh muffins at breakfast, his favorite movie playing at dusk. I thought I'd left every piece of hope at our feet, but I didn't realize the real battle lay ahead, one that required more than love and comfort. It would demand truth and a reckoning for the woman who had stolen my father's dignity for far too long. When I met with the funeral home director in late November, a chill ran through me before I even said a word. The room smelled of polished wood and faint floral spray, as if morning itself had a fragrance. I laid Dad's paperwork on the mahogany desk, his death certificate, my durable power of attorney, a stack of bills showing my name as co-signer. I expected a nod, a sympathetic glance. Instead, the director tapped a pen against the contract and looked up, lips pressed into a thin line. "We'll need your mother's signature to authorize cremation," he said quietly. My stomach turned to lead. I left without a word and headed into the parking lot under a gray sky, the wind whipping fallen leaves around my ankles. I called her the moment I got in my car. My fingers trembled on the steering wheel. "Mom," I said, forcing calm into my voice, "they won't cremate him without your consent." She sighed like I'd asked her to solve world hunger. "Fine," she said, clipped. "I'll sign." 48 hours passed with no signature. I watched Dad in his hospice bed, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths, while my phone lay silent on the table. Every minute felt like dragging knives through my ribs. Finally, she called. "I'll sign," she said, "but only if I get his survivor benefits." Her tone was smug, as though she'd just bargained for rare china. "You know that's hers by law," I reminded her, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. She laughed, a low, echoing sound that made my blood run cold. "Do you want him cremated or not?" I agreed. She faxed the signature that evening. When I saw her scrawl at the bottom, her name printed like a threat, I felt sick. But there was relief too, like a door finally unlocked after years of being barred. I signed the paperwork, collected the permit, and cradled it as if it were Dad's last heartbeat. Still, that agreement was a hollow victory. In the days that followed, she ramped up her manipulations. She texted family group chats with sob stories, how her heart was shattered, how she lost her soulmate. She claimed I'd pushed her out of Dad's life, painting herself as the wronged spouse. Cousins who hadn't spoken in years messaged me, worried I'd turned cruel. I responded with clipped facts, every skipped medication, every bounced check, every therapy session she'd ditched. Some listened, others recoiled. Behind the scenes, I launched one last legal assault. I filed a petition with Adult Protective Services, listing incidents of financial exploitation and neglect. I included copies of forged checks made out to her name, bank statements showing withdrawals made in the dead of night, notes from Dad's doctor attesting to her failure to assist him with basic needs. Days later, a caseworker delivered the same verdict I'd heard before. "It's a civil matter. We can't remove next of kin." My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. At night, I lay awake on the couch beside Dad's bed, my body coiled like a spring about to snap. I forced myself to breathe slowly. Inhale for 4, exhale for 6, just like my therapist taught me. Yet each breath felt ragged, like I was trying to suck air through a straw. My palms prickled with sweat, and my thoughts spun into a cyclone. She's getting away with it. She's laughing at us. In therapy, we unpacked the pattern of her abuse, the way she'd withheld affection to keep Dad clinging, how she'd weaponized his illness as justification for her own cruelties. I found myself recounting scenes as though they were scripted. Mom berating him for mouthing words too slowly in speech therapy, Mom canceling the caregiver who came twice a week because she needed the money. Each memory was a fresh cut, and I bled onto my journal pages night after night. Black ink bled into smeared tears as I cataloged every slight and stolen dollar. Meanwhile, the hospice nurse, gentle-eyed and soft-spoken, became my ally. She confided that she'd seen worse cases, sons and daughters kept at arm's length by spouses who treated their dying partners like possessions. But her sympathy was tempered by policy. Once Mom had signed the papers, her hands were clean. My frustration pivoted between wanting to scream and wanting to sob. One afternoon, as soft rain traced patterns on the window panes, I noticed how thin Dad's skin looked, like parchment ready to tear. He asked for iced tea, but Mom would have brought him morphine first. I poured him a glass instead, sliding it into his trembling hand. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, his knuckles relaxed around the cup. "Thank you, sweetheart," he murmured. His voice was a cracked record playing our childhood lullaby. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "Always." That small moment of peace was swallowed by a flare-up of her false piety. She attended Dad's memorial planning meeting unannounced, dripping with outrage because I didn't include her in the guest list. She slammed her hand on the conference table when I refused to add her name to the funeral program. My throat closed up. Hate and pity warred inside me. I wanted to shake her until her bones rattled, or choke back tears for the woman she could have been. A week before the service, she sent me a letter, typed formal, threatening legal action if I omitted her in the obituary. Each line was punctuated with demands for respect and recognition. I reread it until the paper tore in my hands. Then I printed it and filed it in a folder labeled Evidence. I didn't tell her I'd done that. I just closed the folder and set it on the coffee table, where the afternoon sun turned it into a dark silhouette. Every encounter with her felt like walking through a minefield. A misplaced word, a wrong glance, and I'd trigger an emotional explosion. Accusations of being ungrateful, cold, even cruel. She called me the Ice Queen, said I didn't care about my own father. And for a moment, I questioned myself. Was I the villain in my own story? Then I'd see Dad's smile in my mind, that crooked grin when he teased me about my report cards. I'd hear his voice whisper, "You're the one who stayed." That memory sparked a light in the darkness, reminding me that I wasn't acting out of spite. I was fighting for justice. Still, as the days ticked down to the funeral, I felt the tension coil tighter. Each morning, I woke with anxiety like a live wire in my chest. Every phone call from her made my skin crawl. And when night fell, the house was haunted by silence and unspoken threats. I knew I was at a crossroads, continue to absorb her manipulation or finally confront the lie she'd built for herself. The question pulsed in my veins like an electric current. How do you punish someone who won't acknowledge the crime? I still remember the afternoon I found my father's old address book tucked into the back of his desk drawer. It was a battered leather volume, its spine cracking with age, and inside every page was lined with his loopy cursive. I flipped through names of electricians he'd trained, neighbors he'd delivered Christmas turkeys to, old friends who'd long since moved away. Then I came to the page where he'd listed my mother. Her name was there, Marianne Carter. But it had been crossed out with a single, deliberate line of black ink. I stared at it, my throat constricting. In that moment, I realized my father had made his own statement. He had erased her from his life before death even claimed him. That small notebook became my catalyst. I carried it with me into my bedroom, shut the door, and sank onto the edge of my bed. I held the book against my heart and felt the weight of every unspoken apology he'd owed himself. The space on the page where her name should have been felt like an empty frame waiting for the portrait of truth. In that quiet, sunlit room, clarity struck me like lightning. I had the power to tell his story as he would have wanted it told, without her. For days, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by scraps of paper covered in jagged notes. I mapped out every detail of what his obituary would say, and more importantly, what it would omit. I wrote drafts of the opening lines. John Michael Carter passed away on December 1st, 2022, surrounded by love and laughter and cared for by his devoted daughter, Emily. I let the words roll off the pen, unburdened by guilt or hesitation. I pictured the local paper's obituary column, the small black and white photo of him smiling in his workshop, and then the headline, "Beloved Father, Friend, Mentor." No mention of a spouse, no hint of her silhouette standing beside his coffin. But it wasn't enough to simply erase her presence. I needed to seal her out in a way that could never be undone. I began assembling evidence, copies of bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, photographs of Mom walking away from Dad's wheelchair, letters from his therapist lamenting her absence. Each piece of proof I placed into a folder labeled, "For the Record." I knew that if she challenged the obituary, I would stand ready. Late at night, under the glow of my desk lamp, I refined the language. I wove in small nods to the life he'd lived, the rusted Chevy he restored every summer, the Sunday pancakes he flipped for me when I woke at dawn, the time he spent teaching neighborhood kids how to wire a lamp safely. I wanted the obituary to breathe with his true essence. I practiced reading it aloud, imagining the gasp in the chapel when the crowd realized no one else would be named. At the same time, I carefully orchestrated the timing. I contacted the funeral home coordinator on December 20th, asking for the final proof 3 days before the service. That would give me a narrow window, public release in the paper on the morning of the funeral, ensuring every mourner saw it even before entering the chapel. I considered that moment my moment of truth, when silence and omission would speak louder than any confrontation. Throughout it all, my mind returned to the moment I'd held Dad's hand as his breath slowed on that first night of hospice. His fingers had trembled, and I'd squeezed back, promising him dignity and love until the end. I owed him this last act of service, to defend his legacy from the woman who had spent years chipping away at his spirit. I rehearsed the moral justification I'd use if anyone questioned me. She had forfeited the right to be remembered alongside him. Despite my resolve, doubts crept in. What if I was seen as cruel? What if I became the villain in my own story? Yet each time I felt hesitation, I recalled her final bargaining, demanding his benefits in exchange for a signature on the cremation papers. Her casual cruelty had stripped away my right to hesitate. Justice, I realized, was about more than punishment. It was about restoration, about setting the record straight for a man who could no longer speak for himself. As the days ticked down, I rehearsed small verbal tussles in my head, how I would calmly explain to Aunt Lisa, who was endlessly loyal to Mom, why no widow would appear in the printed tribute. I pictured the funeral director handing me the hot-off-the-press copy of the obituary and the satisfying thud of the folded newspaper landing in my hands. I thought of the hush that would fall as people whispered, "Where is she?" And then I imagined walking down that aisle, my chin held high, knowing I had crafted a reckoning not with malicious words, but with absolute truth. In the final hours before the service, I assembled my notes, locked them in a drawer, and took a deep breath. The plan was simple, but powerful. Expose her absence by refusing to acknowledge her existence. Let the world ask the question she could never answer. And in the wake of her silence, let my father's genuine devotion shine brighter than any lie she had woven. That night, I slept little. But when I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled not with fear, but with the echo of his laughter and the certainty that I was honoring him, and myself, by finally stepping into my own power. The next morning, I awoke ready to execute the plan that would change everything. The morning the obituary ran, I woke before dawn, heart pounding like a drum. I slipped into the kitchen, brewed extra strong coffee, and opened my laptop to the online edition of the paper. There it was, 2 neat columns under the headline, "Celebrating the Life of John Michael Carter." His photo smiled back at me, hammer in hand, grin wide, eyes bright. I scrolled down and read the final lines. Survived by his daughter Emily Carter, who cared for him through every hardship. No mention of wife or widow. I pressed my hand to the screen as though reaching for his warmth. By 8 a.m., the physical paper hit front lawns across town. I loaded a stack into my arms and quietly drove to the funeral home. The slate gray sky matched my mood, tense anticipation underneath a blanket of calm. In the lobby, the director handed me the printed proofs, folded pages that carried my father's truth. He offered a sympathetic nod. I nodded back and tucked the papers into my coat pocket. As guests began arriving, I spotted her through the frosted glass. Mom, red-rimmed eyes and a coat too bright for mourning. She paused, saw the obituary in my hand, and her face went slack. I didn't approach. Instead, I climbed the steps to the chapel, feeling like a general surveying the field. Inside, hushed voices drifted between pews. The scent of lilies mixed with the musk of old wood. I took my place at the front, beside the casket, and watched through the corner of my eye. When the pastor cleared his throat and began, "Friends and family, we gather to honor John," heads turned to the printed program. Moments later, a ripple of confusion. Guests exchanging glances, pointing at empty spouse lines. She stumbled forward, clutching the funeral program as if for dear life. Her face flamed. I stayed still, calm as a lake at sunrise. The pastor's voice trembled slightly as he read aloud the line, "Cremation, authorized by his devoted daughter, Emily Carter." Gasps echoed off the rafters. My mother's lips parted once, twice. No words came. In that pregnant silence, I felt the sweet hum of justice. After the service, in the bright sunshine outside the chapel doors, whispers followed her like a cloud. "Where is she?" Wasn't she his wife? Even the funeral director approached her. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Carter." But she cut him off, voice shaking. "My name's not there." He offered condolences. She waved him away. Meanwhile, people thanked me. Neighbors who'd quietly observed her cruelty, Dad's former colleagues, the hospice nurse who'd seen my late-night visits. I smiled and accepted hugs, feeling each embrace stitch up old wounds. Back home, I checked social media, screenshots of the obituary, heated comments, local gossip pages speculating on the omission. My mother's public pleas for sympathy, "I was left out of my husband's goodbye," were drowned out by posts exposing her neglect. Someone even shared a photo of a blank line where "spouse" should have been captioned, "when you erase your own marriage." The humiliation was palpable, viral in its reach. That evening, she arrived unannounced at my door, clutching a single rose. Rain slicked her hair to her temples. "You've gone too far," she whispered, voice brittle. I stepped aside and let her in, guiding her to the kitchen table. I poured her tea, weak and unsweetened, just as she'd offered Dad once, then refused to refill his cup. She stared at the steaming mug as though it were a snake. "I wanted people to know the truth," I said softly. "You never showed up." She looked away, tears brimming. "I loved him." I set my jaw. "You never proved it." Her shoulders sagged. She reached for the mug, but I pulled it back. Her fingers trembled but didn't reach. I watched her collapse into a chair, silent and shamed. Word spread through the family. Aunt Lisa confessed she'd believed my mother's sob stories for years. Cousins called to apologize. Even my grandmother sent a letter. "Emily, you did what needed to be done." In the days that followed, Mom's attempts to claw her way back, public letters begging forgiveness, church friends offering her pity, fell flat. Her follower count on social media halved. No one lent her their ear. I let her struggle in the storm she'd created. And me? I felt something unfamiliar and electric. Liberation. I walked into my father's now empty workshop and ran my hand along the workbench he'd built. Sawdust motes hung in the afternoon light like tiny stars. I hummed his favorite tune, "Georgia on My Mind," and for the first time in years, I believed in the power of naming truth out loud. By week's end, the obituary had become my father's greatest eulogy. Not just words on paper, but a mirror held up to his legacy, and to hers. In that reflection, his devotion shone brighter than any lie she had spun, and I, his daughter, had finally reclaimed his story. When the first condolences turned into whispered questions about the missing widow, I felt a strange rush of triumph and relief. Neighbors who'd once greeted my mother with sympathetic smiles now stopped me in grocery aisles to murmur, "I saw the obituary. It called you his only surviving family. Brave move." Their eyes held something like admiration, and for the first time I understood how much power lay in telling the unvarnished truth. By midday, at the small accounting firm where I work, clients approached me between spreadsheets and ledger lines. One older gentleman patted my shoulder and said, "Your dad would have been proud. You honored him." My heart swelled at the thought that his legacy could outshine the false narrative my mother had spun for years. Over the next few days, Facebook lit up with shared screenshots of the obituary's blank spouse line. Comments ranged from "so well deserved" to "harsh, but justified." A local gossip page speculated on the motives, and someone even started a thread titled, "Who's the woman he really loved?" I didn't join the debate. I watched from afar, savoring the collective curiosity that my silence had unleashed. In group chats with old school friends, I received messages like, "We always wondered why she disappeared whenever Dad needed her." Their tone shifted from polite nostalgia to open empathy for me and my father. Within the family, reactions varied wildly. Aunt Lisa, Mom's staunchest defender, texted me in the early hours, "Emily, I've been blind. I'm so sorry I never asked what was really happening." My breath caught. Her words felt like a door finally creaking open. Cousins who had stayed neutral now admitted they'd heard Mom's stories but never questioned them. Even Grandma, who lived 2 states away, sent a handwritten letter. "Dear Emily, your father always spoke of you as his rock. Thank you for giving him the dignity he deserved." Her script was shaky, but her message was firm. I had done right by my father. Mom tried everything to reclaim her place. She sent a formal letter to the newspaper demanding a correction, claiming editorial oversight. She called the funeral home director, pleading, "You must add me. I was his wife." I let every plea go unanswered. When she stormed into my home office one afternoon, red-faced and dripping with tears, I closed the door gently between us and said, "You chose your priorities. I chose his dignity." The power imbalance shifted irreversibly. She no longer held sway over my life or my father's memory. In private moments, I grappled with unexpected pangs of guilt. Late at night, I'd catch my reflection in the bedroom mirror and question, was I too harsh? Had I shown enough compassion? Then I'd remember the forged checks, the missed doctor's appointments, the nights my father lay alone and afraid. Those images chased away any lingering regret, reminding me that justice sometimes demands tough measures. My therapist called it necessary boundary enforcement, but I knew it felt like setting a wounded soul free. I watched Mother's social sphere shrink as hers did. Her online followers dwindled one by one. The pity party she'd hosted on Facebook evaporated, leaving her isolated in a group of pitying silence. Meanwhile, friends who'd distanced themselves from Dad reached out to me, offering support, sharing memories, asking if there was anything they could do. I organized a small memorial gathering in his honor, inviting only those who had stood by him. As I looked around at the faces of genuine kindness, I felt that aching void where Mom's seat had been, replaced by a circle of authentic love. Long-term, the fallout reshaped our family dynamics. Mom moved into a small apartment downtown, no longer under the shadow of the house she once treated like her personal ATM. She called occasionally, her voice tentative, seeking reconciliation. I responded with clear boundaries. "You can visit if you show up when it matters." Those words, once impossible for me to speak, now felt like a lifeline between past grievances and future possibility. I wasn't eager to forgive, but I was willing to remain civil on my terms. Most importantly, I found a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Driving past Dad's old workshop, I no longer cringed at the thought of what-ifs. Instead, I saw a symbol of resilience, a place where a man built a life and a daughter reclaimed it for him. Whenever doubt crept in, I revisited his photo on my desk, smiling, tools in hand, free from neglect. I learned that true victory lies not in spite, but in honoring love and truth, even when doing so requires a ruthless silence that speaks louder than any accusation. Thank you for sticking with me through every tense moment. From the day I brought Dad home under hospice care, to the instant his obituary spoke louder than any accusation. This story isn't just about erasing a name on a printed page. It's about reclaiming the narrative of someone who spent his final years unseen, unheard, and taken for granted. In those silent lines of black text, I gave him the dignity he deserved and set a boundary that taught a lesson louder than any courtroom verdict. If you've ever felt powerless watching a loved one be mistreated, remember, sometimes the greatest act of love is telling the unvarnished truth. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect someone's legacy? Hit like if you believe honesty can be the most powerful form of justice, and subscribe for more real-life stories of standing up, speaking out, and finding strength in silence. Ring the bell so you never miss a tale where courage turns the page on betrayal. If you enjoyed this journey, check out our next video about the time I confronted my best friend's betrayal, and trust me, you won't want to miss how that one ends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story, Story 2. My children were getting ready for Christmas pictures when I knocked on the door with presents. My mother opened it. This year, we will only be doing close family. Do they not want us? My son asked, holding his gift bag. Let's go create our own memories, I said. I canceled my brother's lease's autopay, froze the family card, and opened my app on the way home. My dad yelled and called 10 minutes later. Never in my life have I felt so ashamed in front of my children. My daughter was still trying to balance her Santa hat perfectly, and my son was standing on either side of me, holding the gift bag in both hands like it was a treasure chest. For weeks, we have been organizing this. Handmade cards, family photo prints, and matching sweaters. When we pulled into my parents' driveway, they were giddy with anticipation. We weren't invited, but I hadn't told them, primarily because I didn't think it was true. Since we had been there for a while, we approached the door as though we belonged there. My mom didn't even try to look surprised when she opened it at last. I merely stood there like I was selling magazines, partially obstructing the entrance. She spoke in a flat tone. We are only celebrating with our closest family members this year. That was it. No grin, no justification, nothing. I glanced at my children. My daughter ceased fiddling with her hat. As if he hadn't heard her correctly, my son gazed at her. They're not interested in us. I didn't answer. I simply gave them a single nod before turning around and whispering, "Let's create our own memories." Even though I could feel the heat in my face, I kept it to myself, not in their presence. Until we got back in the car, I suppressed it. After driving and waiting for the doors to close, I pulled out my phone, opened the bank app, and pulled out that family card. My parents went shopping for Christmas, gas, and groceries. As if it were theirs, they swiped it. After freezing it, I went into the autopay settings and stopped sending Jared's rent, which was $100 per month. My brother, who had a finance degree but had been unemployed for 2 years, always managed to have concert tickets and a brand new phone case. 3 months ago, my parents had called me at 9 o'clock every time I saw him, claimed that Jared was having a difficult time, and that he would be evicted if the rent wasn't paid by the following morning. They claimed it was an emergency and that family members look out for one another, so I paid it without even arguing. It's funny how that operates. My phone rang 10 minutes after I had frozen everything. Dad's name came to life. I replied, "Do you think you're doing something?" No introduction, no question about why we left. When they realized the card had stopped working, they became furious without first checking on the children. Since they are triggered by money, not people, Jared most likely called in a panic when his rent payment bounced. I told him we were going home and that the kids were okay, but I didn't say much in response. He was shouting, accusing me of being petty, saying that I was renting Christmas, and saying that this was not the proper behavior for a family. Then he really did say this: "Just because you're angry doesn't mean you can take things away." We had a little party. After that, I stopped and sat quietly while the children watched the lights turn on, the houses pass, Anger was piling up in my chest like pressure behind a dam. They made fun of me in front of my kids. They acted as though we didn't exist. And I was the issue now. Making it about money was their goal. All right, they were unaware that I had been paying more. Not the card alone, not the rent alone, my dad's prescription drugs, checkups, therapy, and medical bills. I made monthly contributions to a plan that covered them. I wanted to help, so I did it quietly. Since I believed it to be important, that was going to change. They decided to draw a line on the wrong night. I was still making an effort to keep things normal for the kids the morning after Christmas. They took turns using the Bluetooth speaker to play DJ music while we made cinnamon rolls and remained in our pajamas until noon. But beneath everything I was doing, not even irate, I was just astounded by how carelessly my parents had thrown us out. My children stood waiting to be admitted, and I doubted they even understood how embarrassing it was to be rejected like strangers on their doorstep. I didn't answer my dad's first and second calls. It was the third at 10:34 a.m., and just to finish it, I picked it up at last. "How were the children?" He didn't inquire. What transpired at the door was not mentioned. He launched into it as if we were resuming a conversation we had never had. What caused the pharmacy to reject the card last night? My own damn credit card had to be used. No expression of regret or reference to their actions, only grievances. He pretended that I had made a clerical mistake, as if I hadn't remembered to load a gift card. I said very little. I just informed him that I had canceled Jared's rent payment and disabled the family card. A pause was followed by a blast. He accused me of punishing everyone for a mere miscommunication and of being vindictive. He used the word miscommunication, as though it was a scheduling mistake to keep us out on Christmas Eve. He said I'd embarrass them in front of their friends. That Jared called in a panic when the rent bounced, and now everyone in the family group chat was talking about my behavior. I didn't know what part to laugh at first. The idea that anyone thought I owed them an explanation or that they were offended. I pulled the plug after being humiliated in front of my own children. I hung up before it got worse. 3 hours later, my mom texted me, "If you're choosing to act like you're not part of this family, that's fine. Just know that when we finalize the will, you'll be excluded. You've made that choice clear." That was the part that really showed me who they were. Not the door slam, not the Christmas rejection, but the assumption that I cared more about their money than my dignity. Like the will was leverage, like I dropped to my knees and apologized just to stay on the list for the 2-bedroom condo and the rusty SUV. Last summer, they were unable to have an appraisal. I didn't even bother replying, but it did make one thing crystal clear. They thought everything could be bought or threatened. That love came with conditions. That loyalty had a price. They really had no idea how far I was willing to take this. A few days passed with no contact. Then Monday morning rolled around and I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was Dad. He sounded winded and, for once, quiet. "Your mother's been crying every night. My blood pressure is up. My appointments are getting canceled. We need that card back on. This isn't about money. It's about respect." That last part almost made me throw my phone. Respect from the same people who left my son standing on their porch holding a bag of gifts, who told me to my face that we weren't part of their close family. That night, I got another text, a photo. My dad on their living room couch with a blanket over him, holding his chest like he was starring in some amateur soap opera. The caption underneath said he's not doing well. No money for prescriptions now. I hope you're proud. I stared at that picture for a full minute before locking my phone. It was pathetic. It was also the last straw. That photo of my dad lying on the couch with a blanket pulled over him, like he was starring in a commercial for seasonal depression. It didn't land the way they hoped. The caption underneath, "He's not doing well. No money for prescriptions now. I hope you're proud." But so theatrical. I half expected it to be followed by a Venmo request. They didn't know I still had access to the health portal. I checked his account. The blood pressure meds and cholesterol refill were paid for and waiting at the pharmacy. Not only had I already covered that month, but they hadn't even bothered to pick them up. They were lying, faking illness to try and shame me into turning the money back on. And I was supposed to feel guilty. That was the moment I realized they didn't just want help, they expected it. Entitlement had turned into something else entirely. They believed I owed it to them, no matter how they treated me or my kids. So I opened my laptop and took the next step. I didn't just cancel the card and Jared's rent. I terminated the health insurance plan I'd enrolled them in 2 years ago. It was a private plan I paid out of pocket for quietly, without their asking. After Dad lost his coverage when his last employer went under, I covered the full monthly premium myself. Every doctor visit, every prescription, every copay, not a single thank you, not even once. I canceled it with 2 clicks, then I logged out and sat there staring at the screen. They wanted to act like I didn't exist. Fine. Let's see how they manage without the invisible safety net I've been holding under them. 3 days later, I got the first explosion. A call from Jared. Of course, the same guy who still lists his job as a freelance consultant, even though I know for a fact he hasn't worked since he got fired from that crypto startup. He was furious, started yelling the second I picked up. They got a letter saying the insurance is canceled. Are you seriously that spiteful? I asked him if he picked up Dad's medication yet. He got quiet for a second, then changed the subject. This isn't about me. This is about Dad. You're messing with his life just because your feelings got hurt. I didn't bother arguing. I told him to figure it out, that I wasn't financing the circus anymore. That night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered, and for a few seconds, there was just silence on the other end. Then my mom's voice low and shaky. Your father collapsed this afternoon. His blood pressure's through the roof. We don't have insurance anymore. We can't afford to see anyone. If something happens to him, it's going to be on your conscience. There it was. The nuclear option. Lame. Even now, after they'd humiliated my kids and tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, they were trying to make me the villain. I didn't respond right away. She kept talking. Said the pharmacy wouldn't release the medication because the system flagged the account, that they were being treated like trash at the clinic. She started crying. I stayed silent. Then something happened. I didn't expect my daughter, who had come into the room without me noticing. Picked up my phone from the bed. She looked at the screen, then spoke clearly into the call. Why did you say we're not close family? There was a pause. My mother didn't answer. Then she started to say my daughter's name, but it was too late. I took the phone back and ended the call. That night, both of my kids stayed in my bed. My son curled up by my side, clutching his little stuffed reindeer, and my daughter just lay there staring at the ceiling. No one said anything for a while. We didn't need to. That one question had cut through every lie, every guilt trip, every manipulation attempt, and it didn't come from me. There was starting to see it too that what we had wasn't just about money or insurance or cards, it was about respect. And finally, they were starting to understand that you don't get to hurt people just because you share blood. The silence was the most suspicious part after all the yelling, accusations, emotional blackmail, and photo ops. It went dead quiet. No more. He's not doing well. Texts no more. This will be on your conscience. Voicemails? Even Jared, who had never met a fight he didn't jump into with both thumbs, hadn't messaged in 3 days. I expected something. A cousin sent to mediate a guilt trip disguised as a group prayer chain. Nothing. So when my phone rang that Thursday morning with an unknown number, I figured it was spam. I let it go to voicemail a minute later. I pressed play, holding the phone loosely in one hand while pouring cereal. Hi, this is Karen from Eden Pines Assisted Living. Your father listed you as his primary emergency contact. We had a call placed on his behalf from a local health clinic requesting short-term care. He mentioned you'd be handling financials. Please give us a call. I stopped mid-pour. Cereal spilled across the counter. The kids looked up from the table. I called back immediately, and the woman confirmed everything without hesitation. Yes. Thomas Morgan Sr. had been admitted. Yes. He arrived with no insurance and only one small suitcase. Yes. He listed me as the person responsible for next of kin decisions. I asked who brought him in. Your mother and another male relative. She said they didn't leave the number, just your name and number on the intake paperwork. I laughed. They dumped him after all the noise, the drama, the threats. They dropped him off like a broken appliance and walked away. And they didn't even tell me. They just scribbled my name down and disappeared. That was when it hit me. All the talk about family, legacy, inheritance, it was never about love. It was about who was easiest to exploit, and when they couldn't milk me anymore, they left me with the bill anyway. Around 4 p.m., Jared finally texted Fee. "Dad's at Eden Pines. We had no choice. Mom's been overwhelmed. If you don't want to deal with it, you'll need to arrange something. We're not in a position to manage this." No apology, no explanation. Just dumping the responsibility and wiping his hands clean. I didn't respond. I waited until the kids went to sleep, then drove to Eden Pines. The front desk Bosnian and I was escorted to a small room that smelled like mint, an industrial soap. There he was in a recliner, hooked up to a machine that beat every few seconds. His face looked older than I remembered, worn out. His hand twitched slightly, like he was dreaming. A nurse stepped in, glanced at me, then back at him. "He's been asking about his son," she said. I nodded. She hesitated. He said, "Not the one who dropped him off. The other one. The one who always handled things." I stood there for a second, letting that sink in. He remembered through all the noise he knew of who had actually shown up over the years, who covered the bills, who got up at 2 a.m. to fix things. They broke. Who held this family together longer than he probably deserved. But that didn't change what they've done. I asked the nurse how long he could stay without insurance. She looked at the chart, then said, 3 more days before we have to discharge or convert into a state plan if he qualifies." I walked out without saying anything else. The next morning I got a new message, this time from my mother. "You saw him, didn't you?" I hope that hurt. Maybe now you'll understand what happens when you stop caring about family. I stared at it, mouth slightly open. No shame, no regret. She was spinning it like I had abandoned them. So I replied, "No. Now I understand exactly what family means to you, and I don't want any part of it." Then I blocked her number for good. 3 days later, Eden Pines called again. They were polite, but firm. My father would need to be discharged by noon unless alternate arrangements were made. He didn't qualify for the state plan yet because they didn't have enough financial records. Apparently, someone had listed his occupation as a retired consultant with no income and failed to provide any documentation. I knew exactly who that someone was. I asked what would happen if no one picked him up. The woman on the phone hesitated, then said he'd likely be transferred to a county facility, not the kind with memory foam pillows and bingo nights. The kind with shared bathrooms and staff that call you sir once every 4 hours. I told her I wasn't coming. An hour later, Jared called me from an unknown number. I didn't pick up, but the voicemail that followed was different. His voice was shaky. "I don't know what to do. Mom's been a mess, and Dad's not making sense. He thinks you're still handling everything. I told him you were done, but he didn't believe me. He kept saying you'd show up. I played the message twice, not because I was reconsidering anything, but because that last part stuck with me. He kept saying you'd show up. He really didn't get it. Even after everything they did, he still thought I was going to fix it. And that told me all I needed to know. My whole life, they didn't see me as a person. Just a problem solver, a walking credit card, the one who would show up, pay the bill, drive them home and say nothing. Even when they humiliated me in front of my kids, even when they made my son ask, they don't want us, they still thought I'd show up. That night, my daughter found an old photo album in the closet. She brought it to the living room and sat down next to me. "Is this Grandma?" she asked, pointing at a faded picture of my mother at some picnic table years ago. I nodded. "Are we going to see her again?" I paused. "Not unless something changes." She seemed to think about that for a moment, then closed the book. "I think I'm okay with that." I didn't say anything. I just watched her get up and walk to her room, calm, uncertain. The next morning, I got one last message, this time from my mother's email. The subject line said, "You win." It was short, just a few lines. "We tried to teach you about loyalty. You taught us about punishment. Congratulations. When you hear we've passed, don't bother coming." That was the message. "No, we're sorry." No, we went too far. Just an ego bruised by consequence. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to myself, archived it, then deleted her contact. They had made their choice, and now, finally, I had made mine. It's been 5 weeks since I blocked them. No more calls, no more texts, nothing in the mail. Just complete, deliberate silence. I thought maybe Jared would try again. Maybe guilt me into one last phone call or pretend he wanted to talk things out. He didn't, which told me even he finally understood the wall wasn't coming down this time. Then last Thursday, I got a letter from a state-run health facility. It was official-looking, typed in that gray, bureaucratic font. My dad had been transferred. It was a generic notice that I'd been listed as his emergency contact. Again, no requests for money, no guilt, just paperwork. He'd been moved to a long-term care center an hour out of town. I didn't respond. I didn't even open the envelope all the way. I dropped it in a drawer and haven't looked at it since. 2 days after that, my daughter came home from school with a family tree project. One of those cut and paste assignments where they want you to fill in grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. She brought it to me and pointed at the top row. I don't want to put them on here. I asked why. She shrugged. They weren't really family on Christmas. I didn't have to say anything. I just nodded. That night, we started our own tradition. Just me, her, and my son. We ordered Chinese food, played board games until someone cried over losing, then fell asleep watching a movie on the couch. No decorations, no matching pajamas, just laughter, peace. And then 2 days ago, something wild happened. I got a call from a lawyer. He asked for me by name, said he was representing my parents. Apparently, they were now revising their will again. This time, I've been formally removed. He said it like it was supposed to be news. I actually laughed out loud. I told him, that's fine, just be sure to leave a little extra for Jared's rent. He didn't say anything for a second, then cleared his throat and said, they also requested I inform you that any remaining debt they have will be settled through the estate. However, they've specified they do not want you involved in any medical or end-of-life decisions. I told him that was the best gift they could have given me. I hung up and looked at the kids who were in the kitchen arguing over who got the last spring roll. They didn't know it yet, but they'd already inherited the only thing that mattered. Freedom? No one screaming. No emotional traps. No guilt for just existing. My parents made it clear I wasn't part of their version of family. Good, because we're building a better one without them. The update. I honestly thought the chapter had closed. There was nothing left to say. They made it clear I was out of the picture by choice. Really? But still, the lawyers call the threats the disinherit ants. All of it had become background noise. I didn't even think about them anymore, unless something reminded me. And even then, the memories felt like someone else's life, so when the letter came, it knocked the air out of me. It showed up on a Saturday, just a plain white envelope. No return address, no stamp, no postmark. It had been dropped in the mailbox by hand. That told me 2 things immediately. One of them was still nearby, and they didn't want it traced. I opened it at the kitchen counter while the kids were still upstairs. Inside was a single sheet of paper, my father's handwriting. Shaky, slanted, familiar. He started by saying he was writing without my mother's knowledge. Said she wouldn't approve. Said she still thought I was testing them and would eventually come around, but he knew I wasn't. He said he could tell the moment he saw me at Eden Pines. I thought you were just angry, he wrote, but I saw it in your face. You were finished, and I don't blame you. I kept reading, leaning against the counter, eyes moving faster with each line. He admitted he hadn't understood the weight of what he'd put on me, that for years he assumed that would keep showing up, keep fixing things because I always had. He said that deep down he thought being the responsible one meant I could handle anything, but I never asked how much of yourself you were giving up just to keep us afloat. That line stuck with me, still does. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to twist it around. In fact, he never once used the word sorry, but for some reason, that made the latter feel more honest. He ended with this: "You're not the villain in this story, and you never were. I think we just mistook your silence for agreement when it was really exhaustion. I won't ask for anything. I just needed you to know. I see it now." That was it. I folded the letter and sat down at the table, just staring out the window for a while. The house was quiet. My daughter came downstairs a few minutes later carrying her tablet, completely unaware that her grandfather had just handed me the first real acknowledgement I'd ever received from him. I didn't tell her, not because I wanted to hide it, but because it didn't change anything. Not really. We were still going on our trip, still sleeping through the night without phone calls or financial emergencies, still living in peace. That letter didn't erase the damage, but it did one thing I didn't expect. It's soften the edge. He hadn't earned a relationship back, but he'd earned the truth being heard. I put the letter in a box I keep in my closet. It's not a shrine, it's not a keepsake, but maybe one day when my kids are older, they'll find it and understand the full story. How family isn't just blood, it's choices. And I finally made mine that night after the kids went to bed. I sat on the couch with the lights off and read the letter again. I read it slower this time, stopping at certain lines like I was waiting for them to mean something more. Maybe I was a part of me, kept expecting it to turn some manipulative twist, a hidden guilt trip. But it never came. Just quiet. Overdue recognition. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just felt tired. The kind of tired you feel when something heavy finally gets set down, and you realize how long you've been holding it. Story 3. You're not needed there, my father said. I just replied in writing. I get it. I then froze the group card app, discreetly reversed the birthday cake purchase, and informed the restaurant that there was a dispute pending. At 7:32 p.m., my sister texted, "Why is everything falling apart?" after they had first made fun of me in the family conversation. Finally, I got 18 frantic calls asking whether I was going to experience anything similar. I'd immediately cut them off. No calls, no second chances, no well-crafted texts, nothing but quiet. That would put a stop to it. However, I was still giving them too much credit at the time. I'm still thinking that perhaps I should put in more effort. I'm still holding out hope that they'll treat me like I belong if I keep going, similar to family. I didn't freak out when my dad texted me, "We don't need you there." It did not even surprise me. I simply felt empty. There was no question. No, it wasn't. Hey, we're keeping it small, or we've got everything covered. This year. It was only a 6-word affirmation of what I believed to be true. I wasn't related to them, only the ease of use. More has been done than I anticipated. I didn't want to attend that meal. Since they determined I was disposable so fast, I didn't, to be honest. I had done all the effort for his milestone 60th birthday. Everything. The car, the bookings, the cake. I was the one silently keeping the whole show together while my mom acted like she was in charge. My sister. She vanished for a week after sending a single passive-aggressive voice message in the planning group chat, complaining that I was micromanaging everything. Typical. So yes, I did take his statement that I wasn't required seriously. I understand, I said. I meant it too. The switch switched at that moment. I contacted the bakery first. I had made the extra effort to reserve them weeks in advance at this little shop on the outskirts of town. Custom designed to resemble a football field, the cake featured a miniature edible representation of my dad clutching a little trophy, the year's best dad. In gold frosting, it stated. I didn't even request a reimbursement. I just instructed them to get rid of the cake whatever they wanted, and that the celebration was over. They paused, questioned if I was certain. Yes, I said. The click that terminated that call was the most pleasant click I've ever heard. I then went on to the group card and logged in. They could all upload pictures and leave voicemails since I paid to upgrade the account to premium. The outcome had been very satisfactory. The typical vapid babble was interspersed with a few true memories. However, they hadn't given the question of who put it up much attention. I did, so I closed the card, erased the admin email, and permanently disabled everyone's access. That little of emotion in digital form. Lost. I then gave the eatery a call. A 14-person reservation at one of the town's most ostentatious locations. I used my card to make the deposit. I informed the management that I was no longer responding to the reservation and that there could be a payment problem. I didn't call it off. For the following hour, I let it burn on its own. My phone kept buzzing. The family group conversation was going strong. With loving emojis as the caption, my mom shared a photo of herself having cosmetics done, preparing for the ideal evening. My sister answered, "I can't wait to get into a coma from eating myself." One of those annoying animated stickers came next. They were behaving as though nothing had occurred. My sister then sent me another SMS at 7:32 p.m. No emojis or stickers this time. Why is everything disintegrating? I hardly opened the chat window when the mayhem began to erupt. Before seating anyone, the restaurant had contacted my mom to request a backup credit card. It seems that nobody brought theirs. She had no idea what they were talking about when the bakery called the house to confirm the cancellation. When someone attempted to view the group card, they were met with an error notice and a broken link. The finest aspect? Every one of their friends was already there, waiting, dressed, and observing them as they hurried. Immediately thereafter, the calls began. One by one, 18 of them. As I streamed a documentary and ate leftover noodles, I watched my phone light up from the couch. None of them were answered by me. For the first time in years, my dad called me last. There was a sense of control in the silence. Without me, that night, which was meant to be about him, became a complete mess and public catastrophe. They hadn't even seen the worst of it yet, and the only person who could have saved it, the person they didn't need, was gone, so nobody could fix it. After a day or two, I assumed they would calm down and perhaps send a pathetic message attempting to mend fences, but they didn't. Instead, I found my dad standing at my front door, a suitcase in one hand and barely controlled anger in the other. 3 days later. He didn't ask. He walked right in like it was still his house, like I owed him something. I just stood there watching him drop his bag by the hallway closet, acting like we were about to have a family reunion instead of a fart. The first hour was quiet. He made himself coffee, sat on the couch like it was his own. Didn't mention the ruined birthday. Then out of nowhere he said, "You embarrassed this family. Not you hurt us, not." Why did you do it? Just that I embarrassed them. That's all he cared about. Not that I'd spent weeks organizing his party, not that I'd been shut out of it without warning, but that the night turned into a disaster and his friends saw it happen. That was unforgivable to him. Appearances were everything. I didn't say much. I simply listened. I was curious to find out where he would take it. He desired an apology. It should be in the family chat, preferably. He claimed that I made a scene and embarrassed them. My mother had shed tears. My sister had apparently left the dinner early. He continued to enumerate everyone else's emotions as if they were bullet points on a court filing. I didn't respond. I refrained from arguing. I was honest with him. You could have claimed that you didn't want me there. I appreciated that. He detested that response. The atmosphere in my apartment descended into a state halfway between a courtroom and a hostage negotiation over the course of the following few days. Apparently unable to leave him to face this battle alone, my mother joined him 2 days later. She didn't knock at all, simply arrived with a bag and a bad attitude. They occupied my space as though I were a visitor, made fun of my furnishings, and griped about the absence of actual food in the refrigerator, asked me why the guest room was without curtains. Then they keep coming back to the same subject. The celebration, the birthday, the embarrassment. I had to acknowledge that I had overreached. I had acted out, that I allowed a minor miscommunication to escalate into a scandal. However, I didn't, and my dad became more irate each time I refused. By the end of the week, my mom had become colder. "You owe this family" was a phrase I had heard more times than I could remember. I lost it at that point. I bluntly warned them that they had gone too far and that I would cut them off if they didn't drop it. And I would have more than just vanished from a birthday if they hadn't stopped attempting to guilt me into coming back. I totally vanish. No financial assistance, no calls, and no visits. They chuckled. They didn't think I had it in me, not because they thought I was kidding. So I called someone. The remodeling of the kitchen. They had been preparing. The one whose credit was maxed out again, for which I had already paid the deposit. I canceled the purchase, informed the contractor that he needed to wait for a fresh deposit from the homeowners due to a change in financial responsibility. I then explained everything I had done to my parents. My father turned pale. My mother began accusing me of being cruel. It wasn't about retaliation, I told them. It had to do with freedom. I had done too much for those who believed me to be a morally upright ATM. That might be the end of it, I thought. However, my sister then became involved, and I was mistaken if I believed the family had already reached their lowest point. Things were going to get worse, much worse. My sister's initial message struck me like a mosquito. It's annoying, predictable. Ignorance is simple. Are you simply going to abandon them in that state? After a few moments of staring at it, I shut off my screen and resumed preparing lunch. I anticipated this. I even knew it would be her. She's always the first to jump in when something threatens the family's image, not because she cares, because she's afraid someone might actually notice how fragile the whole illusion really is. A day later, another message. They're not eating. Mom hasn't sucked. You made your point. And then an hour after that, a voice message. I didn't listen to it. I knew the tone without hearing a word, that smug blend of concern and accusation she mastered since she was 16. She was always the golden child. Perfect GPA, popular, never wrong. She was treated like she walked on clouds by our parents. It was me to whom they gave the check. When the cost of the clouds increased, she just showed up the following day, so she must have realized I wasn't answering. I didn't text or call, seemed to be dropping by for brunch when she buzzed my apartment in the middle of the morning. I let her go because I wanted to hear her say it directly to my face, not because I wanted to see her, as if this were a casual drop-in. She arrived with a coffee to go. Looked around as if she thought I would give her something that I didn't. "Will you really drag this out?" I said. She said. What specifically did she think I was dragging out? I asked her. She didn't respond. She simply began her prepared speech. It was as if she had practiced it in front of the mirror. She claimed that I had single-handedly embarrassed the whole family, that Mom had been experiencing chest pains, that Dad was too ashamed to go to work, and that people were talking. For what purpose? Retaliation. When I remained silent, she stepped up her efforts. She informed me that I had gone too far and that I needed to make the necessary corrections, that this was merely a miscommunication. Apologizing and ceasing to make matters worse would be the mature thing to do. When they told me I wasn't needed, I asked her one question. "Where were you?" She blinked. Didn't reply. As if I hadn't heard it. So I asked once more, this time, more slowly. When they said I didn't have to attend Dad's birthday, where were you? When did I pay for everything? Backstage, when I kept the entire mess together. Where were you? She remained silent. Then she flipped it in the manner of a family. She claimed that I was overly sensitive, that I exaggerated everything, and that everyone is currently in pain. She claimed that since no one else could make things better, she was attempting to do so, as if she was noble because of that. Like I was the bad guy because of that. That's when I mentioned the remodeling. You are aware of the new kitchen mom's constant boasting. My money is that. I made the deposit payment. I called it off. She did not appear surprised, but her jaw tightened. I then questioned her about her knowledge. I hadn't received a thank you. Not once. Not for the reservation, not for the card, and not for the cake. Not even for the upgrade of their home. They didn't express gratitude. "We don't need you there," they said. She accused me of being vindictive, using money as a weapon, and acting like an adult rather than playing games with them. I informed her that the true test was the one in which I was supposed to give my all for those who refused to come across the room for me. She expressed her amazement at my increased selfishness. I informed her that the best was teaching me. She departed at that point. No hug, no farewell. She simply slammed the door after whispering something. 2 hours later, she sent me a lengthy text message that was full of emotional manipulation, gaslighting, family trauma, and buzzwords, as if using therapy jargon validated her claims. Then the true gem appeared. All three of them wrote a lengthy group text about healing, reconciliation, and the need for me to stop using control by denying them love and support. They gave the impression that I was conducting a ransom operation, as if the people I kept helping out hadn't just pushed me out and treated me disrespectfully. I didn't answer. Not even the entire thing was read by me. I felt at peace for the first time in years after hitting the block button on the thread. Just silence, neither relief nor retribution. Their goal was for me to feel guilty. I experienced clarity. That should be the end of it, I thought. The group thread was blocked by me. I didn't answer anybody. I returned to work, rescheduled the kitchen, and cleaned the apartment. This time, I'm the contractor. I felt as though I had just emerged from a cult. It was all more subdued. Easier. No phony affection. No guilt trips. No. Do you have a moment to spare? I then received a letter in my mailbox 5 days after blocking the thread, written by hand. No envelope. As if someone didn't want it traced, it was simply folded once and tucked into the slot. "Can we talk?" was all it said. I'm not like them. No signature. I initially believed it to be from my sister. She had a habit of making herself seem like the exception. The handwriting was shaky, though. Older? Not hers. When I looked at the footage from the apartment camera, I discovered something unexpected. My aunt, the sister of Dad. It had been years since I last saw her. The only family member who had ever raised doubts was her, naturally in silence. When I was a teenager, she once pulled me aside and told me that I didn't have to carry so much for everyone, and that I could say no, but I had listened. I assumed she simply didn't get it. She wrote the number on the back of the page, and I dialed it. The first ring caught her attention. At this old diner close to her house, she asked me to meet her. One of those places where the coffee is burnt and the menus are made of plastic. My main reason for going was curiosity. She appeared older, calm, and exhausted. She didn't inquire about my health. Small talk wasn't how she began. "I am aware that you canceled the renovations," she said. "I awaited the verdict, but it never materialized." Then she split a file across the table after taking it out of her bag. She said, "I didn't touch it. To cover it, your dad asked me to co-sign on my own. He claimed that you were unstable and that you pulled out to punish them." It was so on brand that I laughed, not because it was funny. "I didn't co-sign," she said. She didn't trust them, not because she was standing up for me. My stomach turned when she leaned forward and said something. "They've used others besides you. Your mother's name appears on credit cards that your sister owns. Last month, they went all out and booked a trip. They assured her that you would pay the costs." I was stopped by that. While they were phoning me, I called a vacation. Cruel, erratic, and cunning. They were using someone else's name to plan a beach vacation. Assuming that, as usual, I just jump in and fix it. I questioned her about the reason behind her statement. "Because I believe you're at last prepared to stop cleaning up their mess," she said. I accessed all of the documentation, including screenshots, credit reports, and statement copies. None of it bore my name, but the patterns were clear. They had previously made promises, borrowed items, and said things. If it caught up with them, they were counting on me to save them. With the file and an odd feeling of vitality, I walked out of the diner. Not anger, not despair, just decide. When I got home, I opened my bank app, locked all of my cards, blocked all of my authorized users, and disconnected all of their connections. I then sent an email. A year ago, when I first suspected that they were using my information for financial leverage, I had discreetly consulted a lawyer, but not to them. Prepare the subject line. I wasn't going to leave now. I was locking the door behind me and closing it. It was like unplugging a drain that had been consuming me for years when I cut off the accounts. No big meltdown or explosion occurred, just a subtle change in power that I was unaware I still possessed. But the silence was short-lived. I discovered a series of emails from a Puerto Rican resort when I woke up 3 days later. The balance for one of them was $3,250. Another had my sister's email address as the contact, but my mother's name was on the reservation. I read them twice. As it happens, they made a vacation reservation without telling me. My sister, her father, her mother, and even her boyfriend. assuming that I would pay for it as usual. However, because I had shut everything down, the balance hadn't cleared. I took my sister's call that same afternoon. She didn't greet me, jumped straight in. "What on earth is the matter with you?" I said nothing. She spent the entire 3 minutes running. Claimed that on Dad's birthday, I would make them look foolish. All right, in any case. However, I was now actively working to undercut them financially, damaging Mom's credit, and the resort was threatening to take legal action, saying that if this turned up on a background check, she might lose her job. I questioned her about why she used her mother's name to book the trip. "Because that's how we've always done it," she said. They had been using each other's names, switching balances, and rearranging debt like furniture for years. And now they were quietly admitting it in the hopes that I would eventually show up and tidy up the mess. I informed her that I no longer did that. "You believe you are superior to us because you cut us off?" she inquired. "No, it frees me," I said. "I was acting out," she said. Claimed that I wasn't like this. Claimed that this resentful side of me was only a phase and that she knew the true me. Finally, I told her that this was who I really was. That no one was being punished by me. I was simply moving away from those who had used me as their little dysfunctional performance, a financial tool, an emotional sponge, and a background character. Then, she fell silent. Incredibly silent. Then she said it. "You are no longer family." She didn't scream it. She said it like she was telling me, the weather cold final. And you know what? It continues to hit. I had been clinging to a version of her, not because it wasn't true. There was a version of each of them that never existed. A part of me probably always hoped that one of them would see through the confusion, come forward, and correct us. But instead they got so caught up in their own lies that they were unable to even identify the hand dragging them out. I didn't scream or fight. I simply said, "All right." She ended the call. I opened all of my files while drinking a glass of water on my couch that evening. I locked down every document, deleted them from all accounts, and completed the legal documents that would cut them off from anything associated with my name: bank authorizations, health proxies, and emergency contacts. Then I took an unexpected action. I wrote them a letter for the sole purpose of writing it, not to send. I told them everything. How? I used to wonder why I wasn't good enough at night, how each time they fought, I put the blame on myself. Each time they left me out. How I kept asking myself if I could just put in more effort, earn more money, and smile for longer. They evolve. However, they didn't. I didn't need them to now either. I burned the letter in the kitchen sink after folding it. Retaliation didn't feel like it. It had the feel of a funeral. For the first time in my memory, I wasn't waiting for someone to text me when I was in line at the grocery store a week later. I wasn't looking for any unusual charges on my account. I wasn't expecting to sit on someone else's mess. As I stood there, it occurred to me that I had not missed them. I missed the person I believed them to be. Do you believe that leaving family is like closing the door? As if there would be an echo, something final, something loud. In actuality, though, it's more like shutting off the faucet. The silence feels strange at first, but the noise stops, as if you had forgotten something. I anticipated mayhem, a final stand, perhaps even an apology tinged with guilt. Instead, I received nothing. Total, purposeful silence. Not even messages that are passive-aggressive. Birthdays are not recognized. Don't post phony updates. They simply disappeared. And I became aware of how easily they could for the first time in my life. The first real test came during the holidays. Thanksgiving passed. No invite, no group texts. I prepared pasta. Without touching my phone, I opened a bottle of wine. Despite my reluctance to acknowledge it, I waited. However, it never rang. It was a strange Christmas. I purchased a ticket to Seattle, kept it a secret, walked through Pike Place Market for the entire week, at a little cafe with a view of the water, reading, entering bookshops that I didn't have to be in. It was silent and cold, and I didn't have to perform for the first time in years. Don't pretend to smile. Don't pretend to laugh. No, you've been very silent lately. Is there a problem? There was nothing wrong. At last there was silence. Peace, however, isn't always cozy. It's simply unfamiliar at times. I didn't receive the call until March. Unknown figure. I would usually ignore it, but I felt compelled to pick up my sister's boyfriend. Shaky voice, claimed to have been in an automobile accident. Her phone was dead, but it wasn't serious. She told him to call me so I could help her because she was in a panic. As he spoke, I recall staring at the wall across from me, as if I were observing myself from the outside. I apologized for her experience, but I can no longer be that person. Silence fell. Then he simply said, "I get it," and ended the call. After the call, I stood there half expecting a wave of guilt to sweep over me. It didn't, and it wasn't pride, just some clarity. I was choosing myself for once. Weeks went by. Nothing else was heard by me. That must be it, I thought, until I discovered a letter in my mailbox one afternoon. No address for return, not a mark. However, the handwriting was familiar to me. My sister was the one. I opened it after hesitating. I have no idea why. Perhaps I didn't want to break the quiet. However, I did. It was brief. Only one sheet. No confessions of emotion. No hyperbolic words. It was a list. Bullet points. Simple facts. February of 2018. $100 is the rent. May 2019. Molly's veterinarian bill was $120. August of 2020. $387 for a plane ticket to see Dad. December 2021. $200 for a new laptop. Groceries, auto repairs, fees associated with credit cards, quiet times. I had forgotten. She wrote at the bottom, large like receipts. I don't recall expressing gratitude for the majority of this. I ought to have. That was incorrect. I don't think you'll pardon me. I simply wanted to let you know. That was it, I recall. Other than her name, there was no number or signature. For a long time, I held that letter in my kitchen. I refrained from crying. I didn't grin. All I felt was weight. Not negatively, the weight of all that she didn't say, landing in one location at last. I didn't answer. I haven't yet, but I also didn't discard it. After carefully folding it, I hid it behind some old receipts and extra keys I don't use in the back of my bookshelf. It was necessary for me to keep it, not because I want to keep it forever. That's the problem. I don't despise them. I'm not even looking for retribution. Distance is what I want, and I have it for the first time. That distance that doesn't require shouting, deleting, or blocking. Only room. A really tidy place where I'm not expected to do anything. I also don't spend hours questioning whether my fatigue makes me a bad person. They are not missed. I long for the version of them I once trusted. However, that's all right. Rebuilding is one way for some people to heal, while walking away is another. I continued to walk without turning around.